In the 70s, kids in Australia socialised in a very different way to the kids today. Without the distraction of the internet or non-stop TV shows and computer games, we spent as much time outside with our friends until it was time to go home for dinner. Our hangout was a small creek about 2 kilometres from Mum and Dad's house. Each day, without fail, we'd finish school, avoid going home, and make a beeline for that creek. They were magic times where best friends came together and lifelong memories were formed. But one day, one single event took the creek away from us all. In a blink of an eye, it became off limits and we were never allowed to return. Hello, I'm George and welcome to Another Story, a collection of stories gathered and documented by people and for the people like you and me. Nothing ever changes in Darwin. That's the catch cry that I grew up with. When you're 8 years old, you don't see the inconsistency in the things that you're told by young and old. My folks led me to believe that Darwin was something like a second Paris, a city that was loved and envied by every human being in the world. I was duped into thinking that the bitter world outside of Darwin wanted nothing more than to come here to our world and be part of it. That is how lucky I was growing up in Darwin, I was told. Yet, every day at school or whenever I was surrounded by my friends, I would hear the same old thing. Nothing ever changes in Darwin. Maybe I interpret that as Darwin is so good, it doesn't need change. The year was 1977 and I was now entering what would later become my most favourite time in my youth. A time of easygoing schoolwork, teachers that seemed to care, music that was easy to sing along to on radio, TV shows on one and one only television station, and endless afternoons hanging out with my friends. If you lived in Darwin and specifically in the suburb of Jingley where I grew up, then you knew the Vshape. The Vshape is located in the Rabbit Creek River system just behind the horse stables and accessible two ways only. The first way was to jump into the water way upstream near where the bridge was and swim 20 minutes down to get to our spot. Or, the more popular and preferred way was cutting through Mr. and Mrs. Freeman's farm where our spot was located just at the back. Each afternoon, my friends Danny, Aldo, Richie and I would ride our BMX bikes to the back of the farm, often seeing Mrs. Freeman and giving her a wave on the way as we looked forward to a few hours of swimming and playing like most kids did back then. The V-shape goes back to the days when the Australian Defence Force was shoring up its defences in anticipation of a Japanese invasion. Fearing a lack of water supply, the Defence Force went out to secure waterways in case Darwin was bombed. In early 1940, a group of men from 23 Squadron were commissioned with the securing of a waterway so the ability to draw water for drinking and firefighting could be fast and easy. And they chose this very spot where generations of kids from surrounding suburbs would come and enjoy. A small dam was built that stood less than a metre high and was lower in the middle to allow the water to spill through. The wall that was now complete had a distinctive V-shape and was quickly named just that, the V-shape. The local kids promptly took ownership of it and it would form the ultimate melting pot where everyone came to hang out. At the V-shape, your ethnic background wasn't an issue. Your age wasn't an issue. Neither was the school that you went to or the kind of bike that you rode. But we did have rules. No girls. We all had sisters that we didn't like and they were forbidden from attending this place that was really something of a secret men's business only. Well, boys' business. We were just 8 years old back then, but we felt like men even if we didn't act like it. of the V-shape typically went something like this. We'd dump our bikes at the edge of the water along with our school bags, shirts and shoes, and we would just jump in. We'd swim about and get instant relief from the humid Darwin weather as we talked about our day, our friends, our stupid sisters and life in general. Sometimes we'd play war games pretending that we were soldiers from the Special Forces deployed into a foreign country. We'd sneak up on a fictitious enemy that our government had sent us in to neutralise because they weren't like us. Other times we'd float about in the silence and take in the beautiful surroundings as generations of kids did before us and many kids would do following us. One day a rumour started. One of the boys from another group told us that on the weekend he was swimming here when he observed Mrs. Freeman come down here riding her horse. She didn't see the boy in the water and assumed that she was alone. She got off her horse, took off all her clothes and had a swim, and he said, "I saw everything." At 8 years old, this was a pretty big deal. Suddenly we all got into the action claiming that we too had seen her. We were able to describe each and every detail about this imaginary event. What side she got off the horse, the clothes that she wore, the way her hair was made up, the exact spot that she entered the water, and how she flicked her hair side to side. That was my observation, by the way. I'd seen it in a television commercial about shampoo, and I thought I'd add it in there to make my lie sound just that little bit more believable. The truth is, we never saw Mrs. Freeman down there. Now that I recall this, I see how ungrateful we were as kids, spreading those outrageous rumours about our host. But we were kids, and kids do stupid things. One afternoon in 1977, while swimming at the creek, my friend Richie called us over to the base of a mangrove tree that was growing on the other side of the water. While feeling through the mud bank for clams, Richie pulled out a giant bone that seemed to be 2 metres long. I say it seemed to be that long because we were 8 years old and this bone appeared to be gigantic. We were convinced the bone was from a T-Rex. We had found a dinosaur bone and began celebrating our new fortune as we talked about selling it to a museum and splitting the even $1 million we felt that it was worth. The subject quickly turned to how we'd spend our cut, and the usual expected answers followed, like I'm buying myself a top-of-the-range BMX bike, or one of those digital watches with a calculator on it, or a motorbike, or a go-kart, one of those brand new Atari computers that were soon going to be released. But I think it was Aldo who said, I'm going to buy my mother something special. We looked at him and realised he was the only one of us that wasn't completely selfish. So naturally we all said, yeah, we're going to buy stuff for our mum too, acting as if we were all reading from the same page as Aldo. As we passed the bone around that took 4 of us to lift, actually that's an exaggeration because in truth the bone was probably only just over a foot long, but it looked like it was heavy. Anyhow, as we passed that bone around, it was Danny who noticed that there was still meat attached to one end of the bone. Our combined learned experience and opinion suddenly changed with this new evidence. Clearly, the T-Rex was killed only a few days ago. Now, Danny's father worked for the Conservation Commission, so we raced over to his house and showed him the bone. Proud as punch, we handed it over to him and even took turns at pointing at parts of it as the man tried to concentrate on what had been given to him. Boys, he said, where did you find this? Danny's father kept the bone to take to work the following day, and after school we were informed that a large saltwater crocodile had now taken up residency in Rabbit Creek. It turns out the large bone was from a horse that was taken from the banks of the creek that we were swimming in. The bone and many other parts of that horse had been jammed into the roots of the pandanus trees by its predator. And just like that, A sign was driven into the ground on both sides of the creek that simply read, "Warning, crocodiles, no swimming." We stood there looking at the water that afternoon, no one daring to jump in, as every single ripple on the slow-moving surface of the creek was the subtle movement of a giant T-Rex or horse-killing monster. "I've got an idea," I said. "Let's throw stones in the creek. Let's make lots of noise and terrorise the beast until it leaves the area and we can reclaim our creek back. We'll go on a campaign of terrorising this creature that in truth belonged right there where it was." We didn't care that we were the foreign invaders. All we knew was that thing needs to get out of our land. Mum was in the kitchen chopping onions when I walked home from the creek that afternoon. I raced up to her and, running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, I said, "Mum, guess what? A giant crocodile is at the Vshape, and now we can't swim there anymore because it's killed a horse. But we've decided that we're going back to fight it off every day because it's our creek, and when we win, it'll never come back." Now, let's stop the story right here because time stopped for me as I uttered those last words to my mum. In one smooth motion, my mother, with a horrified look on her face, dropped the knife that was in her left hand, put down the onion that was in her right hand, grabbed hold of me by my arm and proceeded to smack me so hard on my bottom. Now, my mother, when she smacks, she also speaks. It's her way of emphasising her statement. So each smack dished out on my backside is coupled with a word for my ears. It sounded something like this: "Don't ever let me find you went back." I swear she gave me one extra one that didn't have an accompanying word. I remember feeling so defeated and empty, not just because I couldn't return to the creek anymore, and not because Mum had just smacked me, but because I was actually considering buying Mum something really nice with my $250,000 from my cut of the T-Rex bone. In the town where nothing ever changes, it seems things were finally changing. We never returned to the Vshape after that, as most of us found other ways to keep ourselves entertained. 37 years later, I flew back to Darwin from where I now live on the east coast and decided to go and visit that little creek. Darwin doesn't look the same anymore. Jingly has changed, as has the growing city that surrounds our magic little spot. The Freemans have since sold the farm, and there's a huge bitumen road that snakes along the banks of the creek, allowing easy access to the Vshape. With no crocodile warning signs to be seen, I noticed some locals swimming in the creek that afternoon, so I encouraged my kids to come for a swim with their old man. There I was, swimming with my two little ones as they jumped about, splashing and diving off the old V-shaped wall. It dawned on me right there and then that even after 37 years of being away from this amazing little spot, everything was just the same. My kids loved it there and told me that they'd swim there every day if they had a creek similar to this one back home in Townsville where we live. "Dad," my daughter asked, "are you going to tell Grandma that you took us here for a swim?" Not likely. She might be 70 years old, but knowing her, she'll still grab me and give my bottom a good smack for returning, because nothing ever changes in Darwin. Thank you for listening to another story. Today's story was written by me, music by my talented son, who has put up with long hours in the studio with the purpose of producing something enjoyable to listen to for our listeners. Next week, I'll bring you the story of two cyclones decades apart that awake feelings and emotions that I never knew laid hidden for so long. It's funny the things that we remember and keep buried deep in our memories. Just when you think those memories are gone for good, something happens and the memories come flooding back. But that's another story.